All right, ladies and gentlemen, thought I would do a quick review of my Zero FXS 7.2, which is currently actually up for sale, just like everything. This bike, I bought this bike just kind of on a whim. You know, I was bored. I had a spare plate from another motorcycle I had just sold, and I was scrolling through Facebook Marketplace. And I saw this thing for sale, and I had just finished washing Ewan McGregor, I almost said Conor McGregor, Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman ride their electric Harleys all the way up from South America, rather. And I was like, you know what the hell? Let me give an e-motorcycle a try. You know, I've had electric cars. I know about electric stuff. I know that the range is always pretty comical compared to what they actually say it's going to do. You know, their estimated ranges are always at speed limit or below on a perfectly nice day, perfect conditions. They don't factor in wind. They don't factor in temperature. I mean, their estimated ranges are pretty funny. So, anyway, thought I'll take this thing out here before my wife gets home and starts wondering what the hell I'm doing talking to myself in the driveway. So off we go. As you can see right now, I don't know if you can, maybe you can. The range right now says 71 miles. Now that's on custom mode, which is full power. Pop that down, and as you can see, I'm now cruising along silently on my Zero. And I know that this camera does not pick up much of this bike, so you're just going to have to listen to what I have to say about it. Now, here, there's nobody coming. I'll do a 0 to 60. Okay, I'm stopped, and off I go. And that's indicated 60. Now, I don't have a timer on me, obviously, but this bike absolutely flies. It is so torquey. I don't know if you saw, but I have a Ducati 1260 Enduro in the garage there. And I swear to God, 0 to 60, this thing will take it. It's a really, really, really torquey bike. Now, it's got a few modes. Like I said, I set it to custom because what you can do with the Zero app is you can actually configure how much regen braking you want, how much power you want to allow, and the top speed. So I wanted a mode that was sort of a hybrid of the eco mode and the sport mode, in that it would give me maximum regen if I let off the gas, the throttle, whatever you want to call it on this thing. Maximum regen braking like an electric car, in that it'll basically crawl itself to a stop, while also giving me maximum power. And so that's what my custom mode is set as. Completely unnecessary to run every day. I mean, you could totally set this thing to eco and still just have plenty of power to have fun with. And I'm not talking enough power for an electric motorcycle. I'm talking about an actual enough power. There's so much power on this thing. It's crazy. Now, obviously, on the highway, electric motors are not horsepower beasts. They're torque beasts. So, you know, it starts to run out of juice. And not only that, but it also really starts to chew up the battery like crazy at any sort of high speed. But these bikes aren't meant for that. They're made for cruising around town. I mean, honestly, most of the roads around where I live are 45 mile an hour speed limit, 35, 45, whatever. So you know what that means for the speed at which you actually drive. And the battery, it's kind of meant for this kind of speed, but I think if I was to drive it around, or ride it around rather, at like a consistent 35, 40 miles an hour, I could totally get what Zero says, which is 70 miles in quote-unquote city riding. You know, I don't live in Boston anymore. I mean, the thing is that around here, I'm almost never using regen braking because I damn near never have to slow down, except for when I get stuck behind somebody like this. But when I was living in Boston, I wish I had this bike because it just would have been perfectly suited in the city. I think the range, I mean, not that you ever actually need the range in Boston because it takes you 2 hours to go 10 miles in Boston anyway, so you could ride this thing literally all day without running out of juice in the city of Boston. But it just would have been perfectly at home there because it's got the piles and piles of torque for taking off whenever you need, and it's electric. You just plug it into any old outlet. No shifting gears, no real maintenance whatsoever to deal with. I mean, I think that there's a maintenance interval of like 4,500 miles or something like that, but I can't even imagine what they do. Maybe they check the tension on the belt. I don't know. Because I've had electric bikes that I put more miles on than this thing has. This thing currently has, it's going on 4,000 miles. And there's just no maintenance to them. I mean, you got the controller, you just got to make sure that stays cool. Now this is, it's a professionally built electric motorcycle. So they're going to put all that stuff, they're going to configure all that stuff properly, that it's, it's being cooled properly, and the motor's being cooled, and so on and so forth. So you shouldn't really have to deal with any of that stuff. There's no oil to change, there's no any of that. I mean, it's just such a great city bike / like low sort of overhead kind of bike. I mean, obviously there's a lot of bikes out there that you can buy that don't cost a hell of a lot of money to run, but they still do need their oil changes every X amount of miles and whatever else. And if you with the Zero, you do have to pay up front for that stuff. I mean, they're not cheap, but it's just completely and utterly worry free. At least mine has been. So, and then the other thing with this bike is, for what it is, for how small it is and how easy it is to ride. I mean, I never have to use my left hand on this bike. I could just ride it everywhere, just like this. I don't, obviously, because I like to ride relatively safe, but for the kind of bike that it is, it's only 300 pounds. You could totally be a new rider and do okay with it, even though there is a lot of power to get in trouble with. I mean, genuinely enough power to whiskey wrist one of these things. It's got ABS. It doesn't have any traction control. You could definitely break the rear tire loose on it, at least in my experience. I don't know, maybe there is some traction control there that I've just never run into. But I've read a couple other reviews of it that say, yeah, they broke the rear tire loose and there was no real traction control. And I certainly haven't seen like a traction control light or anything like that flickering at me, and I haven't read anything about traction control. The reason I'm sort of droning on about the traction control is because a lot of times it's so easy to build traction control into electric motors that it's kind of like, why wouldn't you? But I don't think that they did. So, but it's got ABS, so super safe in that regard. I do not ride anything anymore that does not have ABS. You might see in some of my videos a very old BMW R65. It's a 1986 BMW R65. That bike is in my garage only because my father bought it brand spanking new, and it will never go anywhere. But even that bike scares the living shit out of me. So now I've been cruising along for, usually what I try and do is I charge it every time I park it, and Zero says once it's fully charged, unplug it, leave it fully charged, never let it drop below 30%, I think it is. Just leave it fully charged, but don't leave it plugged in. They used to say plug it in or keep it plugged in, but now they don't say that anymore, having looked at their data, I guess, to see longevity of the batteries. But with that said, so I plug it in every time, and so this is with a fresh charge. I do firmware updates on these pretty often, so this guessometer, the GOM, is still sort of trying to figure out what my actual range is going to be. But the way I typically ride, which is, I cruise along 40, 50-ish miles an hour, I'm going to get about, if I'm kind of not trying too hard, but maybe I try a little bit, I'll get 60 miles out of it. Now, I'm 6'2", which wind has a huge effect on electric everything. So I'm sure that my sort of broadness cruising along with the efficiency of a sail doesn't help matters. But, and I'm also about 200 pounds, 195 this morning, no big deal. But, yeah, so I mean, if you're lighter than me, which, you know, I feel like a lot of people are, you'd be able to potentially even inch up on that 70-mile range on back roads. So let me get on her again. I mean, it doesn't feel like it wants to power wheelie quite, which is really surprising to me because it's relatively short wheelbase and it accelerates so quickly. And I don't know, maybe it's got some wheelie AI in there that stops the front end from coming up. I'm sure if I lean back on it, it would just come right up. But wheelies are not my idea of a good time. So, I mean, now I've gone 6 miles, and the guessometer's at 61 miles. So I think it'll probably end up settling somewhere around 55, 60 miles. And this is, again, it's on sport mode. If I was to set it to eco, I'm sure that I could eke out 60, 65 miles without much of a problem. But, I mean, so this is otherwise, so let's forget about the electric part for a second here. I mean, otherwise, it's just a typical motard in that it's super, super light. It's really, really fun to fling around. And this bike, I forget the brand of suspension that it's got on it, but they sort of went all out with the suspension. Let me get on her again. Yeah. The suspension is really good. I mean, it's, you know, it's not, this bike isn't meant to be like a comfortable cruiser. You know, it really isn't, obviously. You look at it, and nobody's looking at this thing and saying, oh, you know, I'd love to ride that to Alaska. It's just not going to happen. But it doesn't rattle me to bits while still being nice and stiff enough to feel incredibly, incredibly sporty. It just feels like a quality built item, honestly. And I think that that's because of who they went with for the suspension. They didn't just do generic suspension. It's a branded suspension. I can't remember who makes it, but it feels great on the bike. Now, if my Ducati Enduro felt like this, I would say this bike is way too harsh for what it is. But on this bike, it really feels perfect. Yeah. Oh yeah, God, it's so good. This bike is really, really fun. I kind of wonder sometimes, should I take down this listing? Super fun. But, yeah, I mean, the suspension is great. And then handling-wise, I'm not a guy that goes around dragging my knee around shit. It's just not my thing. I ride safe for the most part. You know, I've ridden motorcycles for a very long time, relatively successfully, not pushing them at all. And this bike happens to have dual sport tires on it, so that's yet another reason I don't really want to push it very hard. But I mean, it's so easy to flick around. I mean, it's just so light. I never rode dirt bikes as a kid. I guess dirt bikes are even lighter than this. You know, the first motorcycle I really rode was that R65, which is easily a 400 plus pound bike. And to me, by today's standards, that's pretty light. But this thing's, from what I read, it's only 300 pounds, and it's just so much fun to flick around. This guy is probably like, what the hell? That guy's riding a silent motorcycle. I've had definitely, you know, they talk about the Ural time factor, where people stop and ask you about it all the time. If you ride by a group of motorcyclists and they catch you up at a gas station because you're getting water and they're filling up their gas tanks, they'll ask you about it. I mean, obviously you're not going to get the kind of attention that some other bikes do, but people are definitely sort of scratch their heads at it. Whether that's good or not, I don't know. But I dig it. I think it's cool. You know, I'm a technology guy, and I just love the fact that that something like this exists. I think it's different. And it's obviously the way that the world is going to go. Now, would I have this as my only motorcycle if I wasn't living in a city? Probably not. You know, I enjoy the idea of, you know, hitting gears and you know, the engine noise, the big V twin or something like that. I mean, I like that stuff. Would I have it as my only bike if I was living in the city? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if space was a constraint, which it is when you live in the city, and you're really kind of doing just a very specific type of riding, which is, you know, maybe going 40, 50 miles a day, if even. I mean, if you're living in a city, you're lucky if you're going 15 miles a day. At least that was the case when I lived there. But I would absolutely have this as my only bike. I mean, it's perfect for that kind of thing. And again, now I'm here in the back roads of the South Shore of Massachusetts, and it's so much fun. You know, I never really liked naked bikes until I had this thing, and I am just a really, really big fan. Everything about it, other than the fact that it doesn't have a clutch and a shifter on the left, it just feels like a motorcycle, you know, except for the fact that you've just got torque everywhere. I mean, I know I've had some really fast sport bikes and blah, 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 blah. But I don't like to cruise around at 7,000, 8,000 RPMs on those stupid things. And even on my Ducati or my GS or whatever, I mean, those are torquey bikes. I don't like to cruise around in the power range, really. I just kind of like to cruise around lower. So you got to downshift if you want to disappear. But you just don't on this. You can just hit it whenever you want to, and off it goes. Anyway, so that's my review of my Zero. So now I parked it. I'll throw down the kickstand, and then I just plug it in. It's still running. And I just turn it off, and that's it. It's so strange, but it's cool. It's awesome. I love it.